Good. Thank you. Thank you very much. So let's start our meeting. I welcome Commissioner Mary McGuinness, and I thank her for being available to join us in this meeting. In today's meeting, there is interpretation in German, English, Spanish, Greek, French, Italian, Polish, and Portuguese. Today is the first scrutiny slot on acts following the taxonomy regulation. We attach great importance to the efficient exercise of our parliamentary scrutiny powers. On April 21st, the Commission presented a package of measures in the field of sustainable finance. And today we will discuss one of these measures, the proposed Taxonomy Climate Delegated Act. The Delegated Act provides technical screening criteria to assess whether an economic activity could be considered sustainable in light of the first two environmental objectives foreseen in the taxonomy regulation: climate change mitigation or adaptation. The classification of economic activities provided for by the taxonomy regulation and detailed in its delegated acts will be key in guiding funding towards sustainable investments, having crucial consequences on decisions made by financial sectors, firms, national and local authorities, and households. As we all know, the Union is at the forefront of sustainable finance, and we are committed to keep being in the leadership worldwide. All this architecture is based on mainly one element: credibility. Credibility of the screening, of the information provided, of the assessment, and of our implementation. That's why it needs to be a shared exercise where I expect the Parliament to join this debate to contribute to the credibility of this exercise on the basis of a serious and in-depth scrutiny. Long negotiations on the file have also defined the core elements and therefore the boundaries of a shared definition of sustainability in each of the 6 categories, to which follow also the importance of the application and operative.
Chair, we cannot hear you. Just a second. Can you try again?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I don't know at which point you lost me, but just to conclude, I was about to conclude. So I was saying that it is extremely important also for the application and operationalization of the do not significant harm. The Parliament will be vigilant to ensure that the acts follow what agreed at level 1 between co-legislators. So this is the core of our scrutiny exercise. And now I pass the floor on to Mr. Canfin.
Thank you, Irene. I would like to welcome all of you in the room or remotely participating. Welcome as well, of course, Mary McGuinness. I know you are working on this file almost on a daily basis, so you know that now by heart. And the only message I'm going to share with you now is just to make sure that we all collectively stick to the time allocated to the members, because Irene said everything from a political standpoint from the Parliament perspective. So my only message is that we will be, together with Irene, very strict regarding the time allocation, because we know that a lot of members are willing to have the floor. So please, self-discipline. So we are going to move directly to the Commissioner. Meret, the floor is yours for 10 minutes.
Commissioner, could you please press the speak button?
Thank you for the instructions and apologies for that slight delay. I'd forgotten the Parliament system. So good morning, everyone, although I have to say in Brussels it is not a good morning. The weather is quite rainy. But just to try and stick to the direction given by the Honourable Chairs, I want to be brief in my opening remarks and to say that this work that we are all involved in is quite groundbreaking and very important. So it's important that we have a good dialogue around the specifics. And indeed, since the very start of my mandate here some months ago, there has been a huge focus on the financial system and how we engineer or re-engineer it to meet the demands of sustainability for the future. And there is also a realization that every sector of society and our economy will have to be transformed in quite a short period of time, and we have to have all of the financial instruments to allow the system to do that. Equally, the transformation requires finance, and that's why we have this conversation today, because without finance and a financial system that is reorientated towards sustainability, we cannot achieve our objectives. Now to the taxonomy. This really underpins our entire sustainable finance agenda. It is groundbreaking and a world first. And you all know that this has not been an easy task to get to this place. I was in the Parliament when it passed through on that side of the House, and I find myself here now in the implementation around delegated acts. As you know, we published the first draft in November last, and I want to thank those who collaborated with us and engaged with us to get us to where we are today, with the first delegated act on climate adopted by the Commission for scrutiny by Parliament and by Member States. A brief history of how this has all happened. We take a step back because in 2016 the European Union signed up to the Paris Climate Agreement, and as you know, the main aim is to limit the global increase in temperature. To achieve that goal, the agreement recognised the need to make finance flows consistent with a path towards low greenhouse gas emissions, and we are not there yet, to say the least. So in other words, the Paris Agreement underpins the entire sustainable finance agenda. And we as policymakers, it is our responsibility to give the market clarity on how to achieve that transition to sustainability. So the Commission in 2018 published the first action plan, and then the draft legislative proposal on the taxonomy regulation, providing a framework to facilitate sustainable investment. And there followed about a year and a half of debate and negotiation with co-legislators, and agreement finally reached at the end of 2019, and this regulation entered into force last year. The European Parliament played a key role during all of this process, helping the taxonomy become more usable, broader and rigorous. The Parliament added an obligation for companies covered by the existing non-financial reporting directive to publish information on the extent to which their activities align with the taxonomy. And as you know, this NFRD will soon become the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. The Parliament also added an obligation for financial market participants to disclose to what extent financial products fund activities that are aligned with the taxonomy. Along with the Council, the Parliament also added extra conditions for activities to qualify as aligned with the taxonomy, which will help avoid greenwashing. And the Parliament was key in broadening the taxonomy to include transitional and enabling activities. So all of this contributed to the taxonomy regulation, which is a classification system for economic activities that make a substantial contribution to specific EU environmental goals without doing significant harm to other environmental goals that we have. So it basically is a tool, and it is a tool that the markets want to help finance flow to activities that support the transition to a carbon neutral economy and support the European Green Deal. But it is not mandatory. And I stress this, it is not a mandatory list for investors to invest in, but it is a powerful tool that provides a guide to activities that will help us reach our climate and environmental goals. So now briefly to this first delegated act, which we will debate today. The focus of the delegated act is activities that make the biggest contribution to climate change mitigation and adoption, as requested by the Parliament and the Council. So we focused on carbon-intensive sectors where reducing emissions can make a really big difference to meeting our climate goals. And we're also looking at key activities for resilience to climate change. The Act covers some 170 economic activities of about 40% of EU-listed companies in sectors responsible for nearly 80% of direct greenhouse gas emissions in Europe. Sectors from energy, forestry, manufacturing, water, sewage, transport, ICT, construction, insurance, education, and the arts. So this delegated act identifies green activity. This means the best available low-carbon activities, so for example, renewable energy such as wind and solar, and these activities need to make a substantial contribution to our climate goals. Recognising the huge task that we have already to meet our Green Deal goals. And these are tough criteria, sometimes going beyond EU sectoral policies because we have a huge task ahead of us. But we know that not all activities and sectors are there yet, and we want to help them to get there. And as I noted, the Parliament was key in this part of the taxonomy regulation. So the Delegated Act identifies enabling activities that allow transformation in other sectors. And these are activities that directly enable others to make a substantial contribution to an environmental objective. So another example would be manufacturing renewable energy technologies, installing energy efficient materials in buildings, or research into materials for stronger flood defences. And finally, the Delegated Act identifies transitional activities. And these are activities where low carbon alternatives are not yet available in technological or commercial terms, where emission levels represent the best performance in the sector or the industry. So, for example, this includes best-in-class cement manufacturing. There are strict limits, including that these activities do not get in the way of developing low-carbon alternatives or do not lead to lock-in of carbon-intensive assets, and indeed that they are consistent with the 1.5-degree pathway. Let me say briefly what's not in the Delegated Act, and we may discuss and debate this today. As you will be aware, it does not include gas, nuclear, agriculture, and some other manufacturing sectors. In these cases, assessments and policy developments are ongoing, and we will work further on delegated acts. So, for example, agriculture, here we have decided to wait until there is agreement on the reform of the Common Agricultural Policy, and my expectations are that that will happen soon, and then we can take on board agriculture. I think on nuclear, you will be aware that we are following what the co-legislators set out for us, so an ongoing assessment of nuclear activities. We have received the JRC report, and we're expecting 2 further reports from nuclear experts, environmental experts, and when we have all of that scientific evaluation, we can then make decisions based on that evaluation from all of this process. And we're expecting this all to come to fruition towards the end of the summer. And as I say, further decisions will be based on the results of all of those assessments, consistent, of course, with the taxonomy regulation. On gas, we will consider including certain activities within the legal limits set by the taxonomy regulation and based on scientific expertise. And we may also need to consider legislation to recognise the role of gas in facilitating the switch from coal and oil. And of course, there will be further separate delegated acts for activities that make a substantial contribution to the other 4 environmental objectives in the EU taxonomy regulation: water and marine resources, circular economy, pollution prevention, and biodiversity. The work on the platform on sustainable finance will be key to help us develop these future delegated acts, and they'll present their reports again after the summer. I really want to emphasise this afternoon that not being on the list does not mean that an economic activity is unsustainable. We simply couldn't develop criteria for every single sector where activities could conceivably make a substantial contribution. And I think in that respect, it's absolutely important for us all to understand that the taxonomy is a living document. It will be developed gradually over time as the science may evolve and technology and our understanding of sustainability. So this is a really key part of this afternoon's presentation. As I've said, we will have more delegated acts or revise existing ones to include other economic activities from different sectors where it becomes relevant and feasible to integrate them into the EU taxonomy. And for all of these delegated acts, of course, I look forward to working with colleagues in the European Parliament. For sectors that are in the Delegated Act, companies with relevant activities can highlight to what extent their activities align with the taxonomy already, as well as any plans they would have to reach alignment. And this will help companies to reach investors who want to invest in genuinely green activities. This improved transparency will significantly lower the costs for identifying sustainable economic investment and help companies tap green capital. You will be aware that there is a huge appetite amongst investors for environmental information and sustainable investment, and this has increased significantly since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. In the public consultation for our renewed sustainable finance strategy, which will be published later in the summer, we asked how likely it would be for stakeholders to use the EU taxonomy in their investment decisions. And more than 100 organisations noted that they currently market sustainable financial products. Over 3/4 of these said they were likely or very likely to use the EU taxonomy. And in closing, we know that Europe wants to be the first climate neutral continent by 2050. And these targets have been enshrined in law, as you indeed all are aware. But this is more than just wanting to be first. In my view, it is essential that the European Union leads the way in the fight against climate and environmental damage. Our task now is to turn these goals into actions. And this is where the taxonomy comes into play. It is a first step, but a really important step to help us transform our economy and our society. And I look forward to working with you as we continue to develop the taxonomy over time to meet all of our objectives. And I do hope that I can count on your support. And indeed, I now look forward to my exchange of views with you this afternoon on what is a groundbreaking piece of work that you in the Parliament led on, and indeed where the eyes of the world are now looking at. So back to you, chairs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. So I will formally open the Catch the Eye, and I will close the list for registration once the shadows have all spoken. We start with the EPP, 2 minutes each as a reminder, and we will be strict to that. We start with the ENVI rapporteur, Sirpa Pietikäinen.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank Commission for its great efforts in this field. And I think it is a wise decision to bring up the delegated acts because it's such a vast file of different kind of areas in smaller bits and pieces as decided. Then again, I think that the Parliament will take a fully and careful scrutiny of the proposed acts, and there are 3 main points what I would like to underline. First, it is very clear in first level of the regulation that the criteria needs to be science-based. You need to use indicators and life cycle analysis, and that it should actually boost up, as understood, the Green Deal and the paradigm change in our economy. So this is pretty clear that the delegated act shouldn't be in any areas lower than what are the existing market-based indicators. That actually is the case in some parts of the proposed delegated acts. It's very regrettable that the national interests and the political short-termism has taken over in the debates where we can set the bar and the proposal. And it is regrettable that the Commission is using the EU legislation and national legislation in some cases as a benchmark for being green. If you follow the existing EU regulation, it means you are not a criminal. It doesn't mean that you add up something significantly for greening of the economy. So these are the points that I think that should be criticized in the proposal, as well as the fact that the Commission has taken side steps in many serious parts of the proposal of the scientific community and it's
Thank you.
platforms proposals.
Thank you, Sirpa. Sorry. So we move now to the second speaking time for the EPP, to Markus Ferber for ECON.
Ja, vielen Dank, Pascal.
Yes, thank you very much, Pascal. Mairead, I'd like to do this in German, if I may, because this is a really tricky issue. I have just two brief points that I'd like to make. First of all, I have a series of questions. The taxonomy isn't complete yet. That's something that you mentioned yourself. There are a number of delegated acts. Energy's been excluded, trade as well. But this is talking about an extension to a social taxonomy, and then the thing that we've always excluded, brown taxonomy. And that's something that we said that we didn't want to have in the Parliament. And then this corporate sustainability reporting directive sets out a lot of data that isn't actually necessary for the taxonomy. And so my question would be, shouldn't we first breathe life into the taxonomy and implement before we start moving on to these other issues? And then the second thing is, my understanding was that the taxonomy was it's intended so that emitters of financial papers would have a way of knowing whether or not they could put a sustainability seal, so to speak, on their thing. But now there's going to be an eco label for finance products, and I wonder how those two work together. I mean, because I think there are some conflicts between the regulation and the taxonomy sometimes. I've pointed this out to you already, and it was never the intention of the Commission to label financial products. This is something that the emitters of the products are to do. And I'm just wondering whether it wouldn't be better, rather than flooding the markets with all of this, than ensuring that we have the clear information that they need. Thank you.
So 4 minutes for the reply from Mairead.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to both Sirpa and Markus. I'll begin with Marcus's questions in relation to the evolution of the taxonomy. I mean, look, there are two approaches to this. We could have decided to do nothing until everything was included, but frankly, I think we don't have time to give to that type of process. So what we have done is an initial first step, where we have identified, and you will be aware of what's in the current draft Delegated Act, and then we have to see what comes next. And even when I look at the work that we need to do, you mentioned the evolution of a social taxonomy. The work that went into getting us to this far, excellent work by the platform, took a lot of time and dedication, and I think we are hoping to get there, but we're not quite clear that we can do it all within this a short period of time, and certainly not within this year, because we do have work to do in relation to agriculture and the other sectors that I identified. Markus, you also referenced the corporate sustainability reporting directive, which is really an extension of this non-financial directive that currently is in place. So essentially there are three elements here of, if you like, the roadmap that we're working towards re-engineering both the financial sector and the corporate world. And one of them is that companies will have to give more granular detail about sustainability, and you as co-legislators will have a really key role in pushing this through Parliament and making amendments as you see fit. The second is the responsibility of the financial system to report on how it is aligned towards sustainability. And the taxonomy, as I've always described it, is both a signpost and a destination, so that this information has the scientific background so it can give certainty to the financial world. I wish we had the luxury to have done this earlier and more gradually and get to where we need to be. But frankly, we know that our climate targets for 2030 are, very soon upon us. So we need to have more of this action more rapidly than is currently the case. So I think there is, if you like, on the eco labels, a commitment to do that, but also a green bond standard as well. So there is an awful lot of work that you and I will have to be very much together on to try and make progress on it. And just briefly, you mentioned a brown taxonomy. I hear what you say in relation to the Parliament. We're not there yet, but this is something that may be an evolution of where we are today. But let us first look at where we are today and try and make it work. To the general points that Serpa raised around, and I take on board, Serpa, you were very much involved in all of this, so I compliment your work and therefore I take on board your criticism. And I think it's fair to say that, we can all find criticism, but I think it would be wrong to allow our critique on one or two particular areas to overshadow the very significant work that exists generally in the taxonomy. And of course, we have to follow science, and that has always been the bedrock of my work here. And we also have to understand the political support for what we are doing as well. But I hope you heard my key message, which is that this taxonomy is a living document which will evolve over time. And I think on some of the sectors, for example, forestry, it's very clear in the recitals that we know that these criteria will have to be reviewed. So I hope with all of those caveats, you will understand our motivation and why the Delegated Act is as it is. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we give the floor to the ECON rapporteur, Bas Eickhout. Bas, you have 4 minutes, and then the Commissioner may reply directly for 4 minutes.
Thank you very much, Irene. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And also thank you very much, Meredith McGuinness, for all your work. It was not an easy start of your of being Commissioner, but I'm grateful that the Delegated Act is there. And I'm also very thankful that you are stressing that we are trying to set a golden standard here for finance, and that this is not about whether any finance is not allowed or not, but that this should deliver towards the environmental goals that Europe has agreed upon. And when we are talking about climate, that this should deliver on reaching the climate goals as we agreed upon in Paris, which is also partly the climate neutrality. But of course, then also there will be some questions on that, because if we now look at the first Delegated Act, well, you are aware that there is some criticism. And I would like to go through them. First of all, on the procedure, the platform, as you are very well aware, also the civil society has a big chunk of them, an important part of them, has suspended their role in the platform because they want to see more clarity on the role of the platform in this process. And I was wondering when we can expect a reply of the Commission, but also how you will clarify the role of the platform towards that. But also, secondly, there is also this member state expert group, which, to be very honest, if you now see how this is functioning, is that it's getting to the lowest common denominator instead of setting this golden standard. So what is the Commission going to do to make sure that this member state expert group is not leading to the lowest common denominator, as we sometimes see now? That brings us to the fields of forestry and bioenergy, where most of the criticism is. It's true that you're talking about a review, but we just want to be very clear. Are you also going to revise? Because it's very clear that as the Commission is proposing it in Delegated Act on bioenergy and forestry, basically what you're saying is that current logging, for example, will always be considered green. And with the renewables, with bioenergy, it's clear that if you comply with the Renewable Directive, you are complying with a green standard, which is heavily criticized. So will you not only review, but will you revise on the basis of the revision that is going to be expected on RED 2 for bioenergy? And are you going to ensure that forest biomass will be excluded from being a bioenergy when you are going to revise the Renewable Directive? And secondly, on forestry, are you going to ensure that the forestry strategy will be in line with the biodiversity strategy? Then last question on gas and nuclear. how are we going to ensure that the credibility of the taxonomy remains? Because, for example, on gas, there are clear provisions in the current legislation of the taxonomy. It's making very clear there should not be a fossil lock-in. There should be no development of gas if there are alternatives available, and there should not be a hindrance of the development of low-carbon alternatives. So these provisions are there in the law. So how are we going to make sure that on gas and also on nuclear, the credibility of the taxonomy is not being undermined? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for many questions, and I'm going to try and be very direct in the answers where you say, will I review and revise? I think it's essential that we revise based on any evolution of both legislation or indeed strategies. That's a given. So I hope that gives you comfort in that regard. In relation to ensuring the forestry and biodiversity strategies are part of the future, I mean, I think this college is very committed to these strategies. So I think that should not be an issue. I want to make a general comment around forestry, which maybe you colleagues could take up at another point. I think we all know that we need an increase in area under forests, and we need, space for nature, etc. We need to have a conversation about public forestry, private forestry, public goods in private forestry, and I think we haven't had a deep enough conversation about that, but that may come. So moving to your questions then on gas and nuclear, you're right insofar as we could have included gas in the draft, but under very strict criteria. So we took a decision to remove it because it was neither helpful nor hindering, if you can understand how I mean. But we will have to look again at where we can accommodate gas in the taxonomy in line with what is in the taxonomy, what is written down in the taxonomy. You will know that on nuclear, the co-legislators, obviously it's a very sensitive topic, nuclear, and if I were to ask for a show of hands in any room in the Parliament, there would be division. But we have a clear pathway to try and, if you like, remove some of the emotional parts of whether you're for or against, but look at the science, which will tell us what on the climate side, low carbon, but what about do no significant harm. So we are following very rigidly what the co-legislators requested us to do. I'm hoping that these reports will come on time and allow us then to look at what we do next. Linking to gas again, it is also true that when it comes to gas, the Parliament, and I was a member, as you know, would have supported gas as a transition fuel. The European Investment Bank funds gas projects. What we are trying to do with the taxonomy regulation is not say gas is green. And I think you would concur with that. But maybe in the situation we have today, we need to find some accommodation so that if there is no other better option that a member state can use, that gas plays a particular role. But it's a very difficult area, and I would need to work with you, both in the environment and in the ECON side, to try and navigate what is a very difficult next step, not just for the Commission, but for all of us to take. Then in the general comments you make about the whole objectives behind the taxonomy, and why we, are being very strict. Thank you for the nod towards not an easy start, but it certainly kept me on my toes. And I was very committed to one thing, and I hope that you, as former colleagues, will understand this. I did not want us to get into a situation with the taxonomy where nothing was published, where there was no movement because everybody wanted movement in many different directions. So I had to work very hard, both internally and externally, to try and make a first significant step. And the week in which we made that first significant step was itself significant, because that was the week when the US President Joe Biden made very interesting commitments around climate. And obviously they are looking, the US and other global partners are looking what the European Union is doing. And I feel that together we did the right thing. I take on board some of the criticisms, and I'm very conscious because I've spoken both to collectively and to individuals. And I'm aware aware that when we move to this next stage, we will equally, have very difficult conversations to be had. What I would ask you to do, Bas, is, respecting fully your concerns around forestry, understand my commitment not just to review but equally to revise, and to take on board the weight of the taxonomy, which has been welcomed. And I think for me that was very important, and I think it should be important for you as co-legislators. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So for the sake of clarification, Bas could add more time as a speaking time because he was the only Green speaker. So now we move to the two shadows rapporteur from S&D, Paul Tang first and then Simona Bonafé for 1 minute and 30 seconds each. Paul.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Commissioner, for joining us. Let me start by underlining the importance of taxonomy. We need criteria to measure sustainability. If we don't have this criteria, the financial markets and the financial market participants will not work for people and planet. That's it. The license of operate of financial private markets are at stake here. And I totally agree with Mairead McGuinness that we need to make a first and significant step, and at the same time that we need to develop the taxonomy further to differentiate better among degrees of sustainability, but also, you're not surprised that the S&D group brings this forward, also to include social considerations and governance aspects. And this criteria needs to be science-based, what is sustainable and what is not. And I'm very glad to see that at this stage, in this first and significant step, gas and nuclear have not been included. But I will reiterate, because I really want to hear the Commissioner on this, that because we fear that including gas and nuclear may undermine the credibility of the entire framework. And like I said, the taxonomy is important for financial markets to work. I want the Commissioner to be very clear if she can seize ways in which the credibility of the entire framework is not undermined. Second, quickly, Chair, I see that...
you are running out of time, but Simona Bonafé is not in the system, so you can... She's there. Okay, she's there, so sorry for that, Paul. But to be...
Yes, thank you very much to the Commissioner. Well, my colleagues already stressed the importance of the taxonomy, so I'll go straight to my question. Now, there's a lot of mediation that has to be done here. We have to consider the dynamic nature of the classifications. We have to go beyond some kind of binary system where it's either green or non-green. We might need to distinguish transition activities, and that can help us to better support the process and try to avoid greenwashing. But I could mention the nuclear energy issue. I think if you look at do no significant harm as a principle, that has to be applied. Remember the long-term dangers of when it comes to nuclear waste over the long term. So we have to consider the possible nucleus between nuclear energy and significant harm in the long term. I don't think it would be possible to actually label it as being green, given that many European citizens consider it to be extremely dangerous for the environment and for their health. Thank you.
Just before giving the floor back to Mairead McGuinness, I will be in total agreement with Irene. Take the responsibility to make sure that we stop the mic after the time allocated, because it's more complicated for Irene to do that remotely. So I will do so later on as well, if needed. I hope it will not be needed. Mairead, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And I have a timekeeper, so I will try and stick to time. And to say to Bas Eickhout, your questions on the platform, I will answer in my summary at the end. So So to Paul and Simona's questions, I mean, first of all, credibility is very important to me as the Commissioner responsible, and all of us want to make sure that the work we do at European level has credibility, and I believe it has, because we've had the work of the platform and a lot of stakeholders and the Parliament work very hard to make that this taxonomy regulation would be credible, and that the good work we've done is at the start of the process and not the end of the process. Specifically to your points around gas and nuclear, I can perhaps answer both questions that were raised here. So neither were included for many reasons. Nuclear because there was a separate process agreed with the co-legislators, and that is still in play. So I cannot say what will happen because I haven't got all of those reports on which to make an assessment. But clearly when we come to that point, and it will happen, I hope, before the end of the summer, we will have to look at what is possible, what is acceptable, and what is scientific. In relation to gas, I have already mentioned that we had looked initially at trying to accommodate gas in a very limited way, as is required by the taxonomy regulation itself. And we took the decision, which I think was wise, to take it out and let's see what we can do, acknowledging perhaps the comment you make, Simone, around the binary nature of the taxonomy. And this is an issue which has come up a few times, that the taxonomy is a classification system, but it has engendered great fear in some businesses who see it as not being voluntary, which it is, but they are concerned that it might result in them not getting access to finance for their activities. And we have tried to explain what it's meant to do. And you've said it, I think, Paul, this is about information. It is about making sure that we give to the financial system the information it needs so that the financial system greens the economy. And as I said, there are many pieces to this particular jigsaw, and the taxonomy is perhaps the most important one because in a very granular way by sector, it details what is sustainable, and many sectors are very appreciative of that granularity. And we also need to acknowledge that today, if only investors invest in what's green, that will not help us. It's very important that that happens, but clearly the biggest transformation comes from investments in companies that are not there yet, so that are working towards being taxonomy aligned. And I think this is where we need to look at how we can accommodate financing the transition in a way which meets the strictness of the taxonomy regulation, but acknowledges that we need money for the transition. And in fact, I appreciate the very quick work that the platform did in this regard, because we both realised that, look, there is this gap here, and there is also a fear and concern amongst many companies about where they will sit if they cannot get finance for their activity. So we hope that that will dispel. And that's why in relation to these difficult issues, whether it's gas or nuclear, we're following a very particular path. You, I think, have been fully involved in all of that. We will have to have very, difficult, I'm sure, conversations when we get to the end of the road in the process. I mean, avoiding greenwashing is in all of our interests, because with the eyes of the world looking at the European work around taxonomy and around climate, we need to make sure we set a high standard. But I think the world also understands that what we are doing is groundbreaking, that it hasn't happened elsewhere. Although interesting, on the day when we published the Delegated Act in China, there was also a publication of a taxonomy. So we want to be part of a global movement, but we want to lead it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Pascal. If you can help me in keeping the time, it's very appreciated, because from remote it's obviously more complicated. So now I give the floor to the next two shadow rapporteurs, and they have 1 minute and 30 seconds each, Gilles Boyer and Martin Hodgsick. Gilles?
Oui, merci, Madame la Présidente.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you very much, Commissioner, for being with us today. Now, your taxonomy regulation has created the framework. Now we need to go into the details. I know that that's one of your favourite expressions, that that's where the devil resides. Now, there's a draft delegated act on the table before us, and a communication that informs us that there will be a complementary delegated act that, as you said, we'll then deal with the subjects that we need to mature our thoughts upon. Well, personally, I would have preferred to have a single document dealing with all the subjects so we could get an idea of the coherence of the whole mechanism and to ensure that it's coherent with the regulation we voted for. But we understand the constraints you face. I'm sure that you understand how this Parliament works, having been here, and I'm wondering if this delegated act that's coming in the summer will be communicated to us before the 31st of August. Well, I'm pretty sure that it will be, but could it be there in place before the 1st of that month so that we could have time to put together a definitive position on this complex subject, so that we can put these two acts into the correct perspective to see how they are coherent with each other? I think that that's a request not only on the personal level. I'm sure you'll understand our constraints, and if you were still sitting in this House, I'm sure you would share our thoughts there. Thank you very much.
Martin?
Thank you very much, Chair and Madam Commissioner. First of all, thanks for all the hard work on the Delegated Act, and looking forward to more Delegated Acts. And the first part of the question is how do you expect to manage the expectation? And I think this was one of the crucial things that we set out in taxonomy, that Delegated Acts should be science-based. I'm concerned that we are giving in a bit too much to the pressure from us in the Parliament, as well as from the Member States on the side of the science. Because as the latest science says, we have until 34 in the current trajectory to reach 1.5. On the hierarchy and the gas, it's very tricky, obviously, but for me, the very important part of it's the separate category. It's not green, it's transitional. So what is the mechanism that you expect to use to prevent and to impose really what is written there, and that it's no lock-in, and that it needs to be no economically and technologically feasible alternative? Or in other words, how we ensure that activity on case-by-case basis is really implemented following the hierarchy: energy efficiency first, renewables later, and only then any transition, should it be gas or nuclear, if it's going to get that far. And last but not least is the general question of alignment, and agriculture is clear there, a questionable issue. Do you think that being in line with the EU legislation is enough to be considered green under taxonomy? Thank you.
Well, thank you both for your questions and comments. And just to deal with Gilles first in relation to the Delegated Act and wanting it to have everything together, that would be in an ideal world. Ideal. However, I think it was important, and I hope you understand why we needed to move in a step-by-step process. In terms of coherence, it seems to me that each element in the current draft, which is up for scrutiny, is coherent in its own entity, so that the criteria for each sector has a coherence for the particular sector. So I'm not as concerned about having this draft and then having another later and any lack of coherence. But look, I'm sure you will advise if that is the case as far as you are concerned. You asked me in particular about the Delegated Act before the 31st of August, or indeed on August the 1st. Look, for me, I would like to get this work done as soon as is politically and practically possible and in line with the requirements, including for a public consultation. One of the things that I have some control over, but not entirely, is the dates at which I will get, for example, the 2 reports on nuclear. Obviously, I'm watching this very closely and putting pressure that it happens. But unfortunately, there are times when timelines slip. And I suppose to fully respect the role of the co-legislators and members of Parliament, and coming from that stable, I would want to make sure that you are as informed as you can be at every step of the process. So if it can be done sooner, I certainly will alert the chairs. If there's any interruption to the timelines, I will certainly alert you as well, so that there is an awareness as to what is actually happening. Equally, it's important to say that when it comes to the taxonomy, science is absolutely essential. It's the bedrock on which we build it. But there obviously has got to be be, if you like, political agreement as well and acceptance of what is being done, and in terms of usability. So science is key, but these other factors are important as well. And I do think that rather than seeing this as a weakness, I think the debate we have had in the lead up to this draft Delegated Act has really focused the attention, certainly on Commission and Member States, but also Parliament, about how complicated it is to define sustainability and how crucial it is that we do that as rapidly as possible. And reference was made to the member states. This is a journey for a lot of us, and I think that the more we can work in harmony, the better the result will be, rather than one pitted against the other. To the second points that Martin made, and thank you for them, to manage expectations and this idea of giving in to pressure. I suppose, again, here I'd stress the science. But equally, we know that over time science evolves, and the taxonomy, as I said, and I believe this very firmly, is a living document that will have to evolve with time. As a long-standing member of Parliament, we all get all sorts of lobbies and comments from many quarters. In my role here, I understand where concerns are raised, and it is my role to try and explain, in a very coherent way, why we make these decisions, to take on board where there are concerns that are very genuinely held. In relation to the comment you ask about whether existing legislation is compatible, I think that was your line with the targets. Some of it is and others is not. And as you know, the Fit for 55 package is coming very soon. And indeed, I expect that it will influence the evolution of the taxonomy. So there's a rapid pace of work at the moment, because time is short, and that's why the support of you in the Parliament as members who've worked on this file is so important to us. Thank you.
Thank you. We move to ID. We move to ID. There is only one speaker, Joël Mélin, so you have up to 3 minutes.
Monsieur le Président, merci.
Chairman, Madam Commissioner, thank you very much. Well, I prefer to look at the substance rather than a technical analysis of the delegated acts. Here, we've got another misuse of the term taxonomy. I don't know what the translations are in all 27 languages, but it creates a concept that's linguistically incomprehensible. It's nebulous, but it seems to satisfy the environmentalists. Well, of course, this is going to help certain energy and industrial companies on the basis of minimal production of CO2. But I think that this is actually rather a con. It's a con in scientific terms, economic terms, and industrial terms. Whatever you think about CO2, it's not the key element in global warming. Yes, it's been increasing over a century, but after all, it still represents 0.04% of dry air. Madam Commissioner, even if you follow the idea of CO2 being environmentally important, why should you leave out nuclear energy? Neither the 2018 proposal nor your expert group have shown the need to exclude this technology. Rather, the reduction of nuclear energy in Germany and now in France has shown that what should have been done is actually improve nuclear energy and to maybe move away from uranium. But it was not an urgent idea to actually get rid of nuclear power on the whole. And what about the anti-nuclear aversion of the Greens, and particularly the German Greens? Aren't you giving in to them through your delegated act, through this green taxonomy? I think that this will end up being in the financial interest of just some, and I think that's I'd like to hear your response on.
Thank you for some of your comments and indeed some of your questions. I'm not going to debate climate change. The European Union is very committed to addressing climate change and has set very ambitious targets. Maybe I can deal with your skepticism about this issue if we look at COVID-19 and what happened well over a year ago, where the European Union and many very developed parts of the world were literally shut down because of being unprepared for nature and attacking us with a virus. And now we realise, as business realises, that you need to take account of issues like public health. You need to take account of climate. You need to take account of biodiversity. And that the old way of measuring financial success through return on investment or shareholder dividends is not the whole picture if we want a sustainable economy. The whole picture for corporates is to make sure that what they do is both sustainable and long term, and that they move away from any activity that causes harm, whether it's to climate or biodiversity. And increasingly, this conversation is not just, as you have suggested, amongst environmentalists, although I thank the environmentalists for pushing this issue. But you now have this conversation in the boardrooms of large asset managers, pension funds, investors are asking the questions. So it is not as if the European Union has created something that there wasn't a demand for. There is clearly a demand for good quality information from the financial system itself that is looking to identify what sustainability means. And today what we have is a patchwork. So all sorts of criteria, as I describe it, a pick and mix. The taxonomy is science-based. It does identify criteria, whether it's for cement production or aluminium, many other sectors as well. And it gives those sectors a way to work towards greater sustainability. And that's important because it isn't just for the sake of climate, which is so key, but it's also to create a better economy, a more sustainable economy long term, and a fairer, indeed, recovery, which is something that we all hold to. I think your suggestions around nuclear, perhaps maybe I didn't explain it sufficiently, so I'll try and do so very briefly. We were in the control of the co-legislators who put in place, if you like, a pathway for the nuclear question to be answered. A big report produced by the JRC, followed up by 2 other reports on their work, and we're awaiting the outcome of those reports before we can do or say anything. And I think that is respecting what the co-legislators have asked us to do. I take on board your comments, and therefore at the end of the day what I would hope is that with better quality information we collectively have got to make decisions around those difficult issues, whether it is nuclear or gas. I know from my work in the Parliament over many years that both are difficult, but nuclear is particularly difficult because some are very in favour and others not quite so. But it is our task as Commission to navigate those difficult waters and find a way of accommodating, based on science and the reports we receive, how best we deal with those sectors that are not included in the current taxonomy. And, you know, I know that the Parliament didn't choose the JRC, but I think its work is significant. It's quite a large volume. We need to look at, as one other colleague mentioned in the conversation, the do no significant harm criteria. So I hope I've explained in a short way our work around nuclear. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we give the floor to the next 2 shadow rapporteurs, Bogdan Zonka and Alexander Vondra. You have 1 minute and 30 seconds each.
Dziękuję bardzo Pani Przewodnicząca. Chciałem bardzo podziękować Pani Komisarz za rzeczywiście jasne przedstawianie sprawy.
Thank you very much. I would like to start for thanking you for having presented this very clear points. I think these were really very clear points that have been made. We are going to support your position because I think that you understand the situation of countries such as Poland, which is emerging from many years of communism. And I think there's another starting point for us in this transition towards clean air. It's a lot more expensive for us, but we're doing everything we can. And it's true that gas is going to help us a lot to mitigate the consequences of the move away from coal as a source of energy. Our experts are working tirelessly, but I think that they are not taking into account the social costs. I don't think that's something that's being taken into account. I think we have to remember that it's always better to get consensus rather than having decisions just taken by majority that is always right. We're not in favour of an approach like that. And we think that it really would be good to have consensus because we want to change Europe together and move together towards these climate zones. And I want to say that the position of ECR will be very constructive. As long as you give an opportunity these post-Soviet countries to be able to transition to other energy sources than coal. Thank you very much.
So we move to Alexander.
Thank you very much. So I think, we are behind the climate goals, but simply without the nuclear, we will not make it. And I think that the current shape of taxonomy provides a huge competitive advantage to those countries adjacent to Atlantic which are gifted with a lot of wind, but over the countries more in the continent which are not gifted with the sun or the wind. And we need the nuclear. And I think it's no more about the science. There is a very positive assessment by JRC. There is the European Commission commitment to establish technologically neutral criteria. I welcome, your commitment to bring this complementary delegated act in late summer. But I would fully support what other speaker from Renew has said, that we should align this in one delegated act and to do it as soon as it's possible. Because look, you mentioned Joe Biden, but look what he has said about the nuclear power future. And I don't want the EU to be lagging behind the US on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the comments and indeed questions. And I suppose I should have mentioned a point which Bogdan raised about the social costs. And I think we all talk about a just transition. And I think it's really important that we do recognise that for some regions of member states, this transition is difficult. And they are working hard to try and achieve it. So I'm very aware of this leave no one behind. And I think we will really need to honour that in order to keep citizens with us on this journey. Even though many citizens want us to go further, there are those who will be impacted, perhaps lose their job, whether it's in coal or in peat, knowing why, but it can be difficult when the impact is personal. So we have a political responsibility to literally deliver on leave no one behind. I do understand the situation of member states that are, if you like, have a bigger path or a longer path to travel from coal towards renewables. I was one of the shadow rapporteurs on the climate law, so I was very familiar with this. And I think we do bear this in mind. The difficulty to move then to link Alexander's point around transition and the role of nuclear and the role of all of these energy mixes is to state the very clear reality that member states choose their energy mix. That is not something that the Commission does or would impose. So member states make their own choice about the energy mix. I listened to your comments around nuclear, and as I said, the process is in train as to how, if and when we can have an accommodation for nuclear. It depends on what comes out of these reports. So I think that's absolutely clear. When we talk about, do it as swiftly as possible. Again, I would dearly love to move very rapidly, but also I have to move carefully and I have to move in line with what is required of us, not only public consultation, but consultation with all stakeholders around the next steps. But we have a lot of work to do in a very short pace of time. This delegated act, as you know, was difficult to deliver, but important that we got there. I'm under no illusion that the next step in this process will be more difficult. But look, we're not in our jobs to run away from difficult decisions. We're here to face up to them. And I think if we work collectively, we can actually make great progress on this point. I do want to clarify, though, that within the taxonomy regulation, the definition of transition is quite strict and limited. So in a sense, while some of us have a concept that a particular fuel, for example, gas, is a transition fuel, to fit the word transition as you think it might into what the taxonomy provides for it won't work. So again, I have to work within the constraints that have been set by the co-legislators for the Commission. But we do it conscious of all of those points that have been raised around member states at a different starting point, around the issue of making sure that no one is left behind, around respecting the fact that it is a member state competence to decide their energy mix. And there are some, particularly as I've said about nuclear, from a climate point of view, would stress how positive it is, would question around the do no significant harm. I won't answer on either of those today because I'm waiting for the reports to come forward. And I hope that when they do, we can have another exchange to try and work through in the best way possible solutions to these very difficult problems. But last point is this: the taxonomy is not about restricting access to finance for any activity or sector, except illegal activities. We should not want to finance those. When it comes to the transition, we want to make sure that we fund activities that can transition. And this is where I think we need to work harder together to understand that we need an awful lot of private finance to fund the transition. We need to allow corporates and others to understand that the taxonomy is not meant to block their progress. It's meant to encourage and enable their progress. And it is a first step in a path which, if we had more time, it would be better, but sadly we don't.
Thank you. So we move to the left, Mr. Padamoulis for ECON and Sylvia Monique for ENVI.
Thank you, Chairman. Ms. McGuinness, we are used to seeing you in the Bureau of the European Parliament. Now you have a new role and a more difficult one. And good luck in squaring the circle, because you have to serve the climate goals under the Paris agreements and the environmental legislation that we've adopted. And the transition has to be done swiftly so that we can meet the goals. It has to be socially just. Nobody should be left behind. And at the same time, we have to respect the specific characteristics of the member states who want to decide on their own energy mix. But this delegated act stipulates the beginning of a new investment charter for fuel and the way in which it'll be funded in the EU. So I'd like to ask you, when do you think this charter will be completed? Because the European Parliament, as legislator, would like this project to be completed as quickly as possible while respecting the balance which the legislators underlined with the institutional agreement. Thank you.
Sylvia?
No, thank you. Thank you, Pascal. Madam Commissioner, first I want to say that it's really important that we have been able to establish the taxonomy. It is a key element in redirecting the financial flows to support our climate goals in the Paris Agreement, and that is something really valuable. But I must also say that it's very regrettable that with this delegated act, the Commission is watering down the taxonomy in a serious way. My question concerns the forests and the use of bioenergy. As it stands, all logging is green. At the same time, in the climate law, which Madam Commissioner was herself involved in, we have agreed, put a lot of emphasis on the forest sinks and put an ambitious level target for ourselves. And at the same time, the Commission is saying that all logging is green. You must see the contradiction. Why isn't it possible to have different criteria for that bioenergy production that is sustainable? Because that is where we want more investments. That is what we want to grow, because that will help us in our goal. If we waste these investments, I know this is a living document, as you said, but if we now waste investments, all of this, the transition will become much more expensive for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Merit.
Thank you to my two colleagues. First of all, thank you for reminding me, Demetrius, my work in the Bureau. And yes, we thought it was difficult. This job is certainly lively, but It's good to see you again. And yes, we are trying to square a circle here. And I think we all know how difficult this is. And I think even today's conversation has emphasised that, but equally has really forced us, I think, to work strongly together for the future. You asked in particular when this chapter will be completed. I think there are steps that will be completed by the end of this year, but I don't think that we will complete finally the taxonomy by the end of this year, because I think there will be evolution. So around hydrogen, around new developments, we will have to take account of those. But what I would like to achieve by the end of this year is a very, very broad taxonomy, including land use, manufacturing, energy where appropriate, to give this guidance to the financial sector and to corporates about what they need to do around sustainability. And I think it is interesting, if you open any financial newspaper or magazine or website or whatever, that everyone is talking about this now. So we, in one sense, we have hit the road with the first draft Delegated Act at a critical time. And that's why, while there might be a desire that we do it all together in one big package, that actually it was better that we got something clear across the line that covers a whole range of sectors rather than having a delay. But it is certainly my objective here to keep pressure on our own system to try and deliver as much as we can within the year of 2021. Sylvia, thank you, and it was good to see you again. We did labour on the climate law and we did good work while I was still there. I take on board your concerns and how you express them around forestry, and I think I'm very aware of this from you and indeed other colleagues. And my observations, I suppose I will repeat them, around logging in particular and the bioenergy. And I suppose with forestry, I would again say I think we need a big debate about the public value, sometimes in private forestries, but that's for another occasion. You know, logging is used and timber is used not just for fuel. There are other uses for timber, whether it's packaging or indeed, in buildings. So we have a carbon sink there as well. I think that, again, I would ask you and other colleagues who are concerned about this, and I fully respect those concerns, to look at the totality of the first draft Delegated Act, including the recycles, and understand where we were coming from in publishing the details we did, and where we know we will probably be going to when we have a new forestry strategy and a revision of the RED 2, because these things will happen quite soon, and I'm sure the Parliament will have strong words to say around it. I suppose as a former Member of Parliament, I always picked the things that weren't perfect when I was criticising the Commission, and you are right to do that if you feel that is the case with the taxonomy. But I would always, rather also ask you to understand that within the broad framework, I think a lot of work we have done on this taxonomy is very fit for purpose. And where we will revise and review, that work will be done, and will be done in consultation with Parliament and Member States.
Thank you very much. Now we move on to our Catch the Eye debate, and I give the floor to 4 members who ask the floor for 1 minute each, and afterwards the Commissioner may reply for 4 minutes. So I give the floor to Christian Buzoy from EPP, then Peter Lees from EPP, Eero Einaluoma S&D, and Emma Wiesner from Renew. Christian.
He's not connected, Chair.
Okay, we move on to Peter Liese.
Mr. Liese, could you please press the speak button? Thank you. You may wish to go to the next speaker, Chair. Sorry.
Yes. So, Eero Einaluoma from S&D. Eero, are you connected?
Yes, I hope I'm connected, and many thanks for our Commissioner McGuinness. It has been really wonderful to hear your quite constructive viewpoints and the dialogue which you are ready to together with Parliament is an excellent thing. The big thing here is that we all agree that this taxonomy has to be scientific based, and then of course it will have huge effects on the society and also to the business sector, and also to the situations and competitiveness of business sectors and to member states. So my concern is that do you have enough information concerning the consequences of this decision in various business sectors and also to the member states? Do you have enough time to take all this information into account that we will have a real good and balanced process and then a good legislation and good taxonomy principles? And are you ready to take all the stakeholders inside the discussion, business people as the environmental sector and also the member states? These are my short questions this time.
Thank you, Eero. Emma Wiesner from Renew.
Thanks a lot, Commissioner and colleagues. Well, I've said this a lot of times before, but unfortunately I will keep repeating this. 73% of Europe's energy is fossil, and we need to do something about that, and we need to do something about that very fast. And in order to do this, the energy transition, we need to increase the inflow of capital into fossil-free businesses. And the taxonomy can play a very important role here. But unfortunately, on a political and democratically and a policy-wise, it left a lot to think about and a lot of question marks, unfortunately. In several cases, the taxonomy goes beyond the existing regulation and goes sort of rounds through the democratic processes. Sustainable activities that can help us phase out fossil fuels, such as biofuels, replacing fossil fuels in the transport sector until we are fully going full electric, they are left behind. So I wonder, Commissioner, will you make sure that the coming delegated acts and taxonomies are in line with existing regulation and democratically negotiated? Thanks.
Do I speak, Chair, now?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Apologies for the gap there. First of all, Emma, thank you, and thank you, Eero, as well, for your comments. In relation to the questions about information and time, look, there is a point at which you have to use the information available and the time available. And I think that we all know that time is very short. 2030 may seem like far off, but it's not. And therefore, we understand that even the work we're doing has its own time constraints. So I do think we had sufficient information, and I don't think we can ask for more time, because I don't think that the planet will give us more time. So there is an urgency about it. In relation to business, I think when I try and reassure business that this isn't just a threat, this is an opportunity, so that any business that feels it has a future in the medium to long term needs to be speaking this language and going in the direction of sustainability. And what we're trying to do is assist them on that path with both the signpost but also the finance to make sure that they can finance their sectors. I do take from your comments, though, that there are some fears in business, and maybe because of COVID-19 worried whether they can do all of this. And I suppose, again, I think we have to look at the opportunities that can arise from a more sustainable economy, both from a health point of view, from creating new jobs, but we need to obviously upskill. So I think, in a word, we do have the information and we don't have enough time, but we have to work within it. I like to engage with all stakeholders, and it is an area that I'm certainly looking at to make sure that everybody has a voice. But of course, ultimately, we cannot satisfy everybody's particular concerns or issues, and that is where we do need to compromise. And I think we cannot compromise on the basic science, but we can try and accommodate some of the political perspectives in particular issues. I mean, Emma, you raised an absolutely key point about our reliance on fossil fuels. And let us be very frank with one another this afternoon that there is far too much money flowing into investments in fossil fuels, both last year and currently. So we have a lot of work to do to change that scenario and make sure that we develop energy sources, build on what is renewable now, and look to science and innovation to help us for the future. You raise an interesting point. on which there is not consensus. This idea that the Commission is going beyond, if you like, the bypassing the democratic process and beyond existing regulation. And in some areas we were being pushed in that direction. In others we decided that wasn't appropriate, because there are other colleagues who would say we should ignore what's current legislation because it doesn't go far enough. So I think in terms of balance, we have struck the right balance between those who want us to go further and those who are concerned about us going too far. I will add that, of course, the Fit for 55 package, which will be on your desks shortly and indeed ours, will probably ask us to go further again. Thank you.
Thank you. The last four speakers will be Maria Spiraki, Nils Torvalds, Michal Vizik, and Laura Astasari. So let's start with Maria Spiraki for 1 minute each.
Thank you, Pascal, for giving me the floor. Thank you, Commissioner McGuinness, for being with us, and I would like to congratulate you for your excellent work on taxonomy. I would like to focus on the issue of the level playing field concerning the production of material within EU and between different member states. As far as we know from the draft of the Delegated Act, the sustainability criteria includes a criterion which is the obligation of indirect emissions of pollutants that they are related to electricity consumption, and it will not exceed from 100 grams per kilowatt hour of electricity consumption. It is also affected a lot of materials, including aluminium. My question is, you can understand that this kind of criteria creates significant differentiation, discrimination between companies based on different member states due to the different electricity mix and due to the lack of truly single and unconditional electricity market in the EU. So my question is if the Commission is ready to proceed by fixing it and by giving an equal treatment between companies that they are producing materials in different member states. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Torvalds, for Renew.
Thank you, Chair. And dear Commissioner, we still miss you here in the Parliament, and we don't envy you there in the Commission. And if you allow for some irony, I think you or the Commission already succeeded in doing significant harm. In which way? By lifting out nuclear, it's easily translated into France. And by lifting out gas, it's easily translated into Germany. So you left the two elephants, the two European elephants out of the equation. And then you have the nicety to slap the Nordic countries for using water and bio. So I think this is not a very stable issue. And it reminds me of Rudolf Hilferding. He published 1923 a book called Das Finanzkapital, where he showed there is a conflict between finance and real economy. And I think you choose the path of the finance and not the real economy. Thank you.
Thank you. We move to EPP, Michal Vizik.
Yeah, dear Madam Commissioner, one concrete question on the activity, rehabilitation and restoration of forests. In one particular place, the chapter reads, the silvicultural change induced by the activity is not likely to result in a significant reduction of sustainable supply of primary forest biomass suitable for the manufacturing of wood-based products with long-term circularity potential. I am concerned that based on this criterion, the restoration action aiming natural processes having a form of less intensive harvest would be automatically ineligible because it reduces the supply of primary forest biomass on the area covered by the activity. I believe that we all expect to have a good restoration legislation framework, but I am afraid that this is a risky criterion that would undermine the effort. I will be very happy to hear your remark on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And the last question will be from ID Laura Astasari.
Thank you for giving me the floor. Finland is a northern country with significant heating cost, long distances, and a large need for affordable energy for heavy industry. So, when will the Commission ensure that nuclear power can be used on the same terms as other renewable energy sources? Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner, if you could answer first the questions and then make your concluding remarks at the same time.
Okay, and I'll try and be brief. So to Laura's question, the last question, when will we ensure that nuclear can be used? Nuclear is being used, and the Commission is not in the job of deciding what a member state uses. I think that's absolutely really important to stress. Michael, your question around primary and biomass, I understand your concern, and I think this is where we need a debate, probably a deeper debate, both in the public and within ourselves, around the role of forests generally, and the place they have for nature, and this close to nature concept as well. So I take on board your concerns, but I think that we can, with a little bit of time, get this right. And I think the forestry strategy is where we would start to make that progress in that regard. In relation to Neil's always very succinct, very clear, very critical, I take that on board. However, I would say this, it wasn't the Commission who left nuclear out in the sense that you reference it and equate it with the Nordics. And we certainly do not and should not and are not in the business of slapping down anyone or indeed any member state. We have full respect for all member states, which is why we listen to concerns. But nuclear is not included because of a separate process the co-legislators agreed. And gas could have been included, but in a way which was extremely restrictive and therefore not beneficial. And I hope you understand that we did a lot of work to address some of the concerns around hydro and bio. And, you know, I'm happy to have this further discussion on that when there is more time. We are looking at the real economy, and the trouble is the real economy today, if it is the status quo for the next 10 years and beyond, will not get us to where we need to be. So the real economy needs re-engineering, and that's where we need to work collectively together. I think, Maria, if I understood your question, and apologies if I didn't quite understand it, you're talking about level playing field and this target of 100 grams, which for many is quite difficult to achieve now. And I think this idea of a single electricity market is important for us. It also means, of course, that, you know, the source of the energy production may, you know, come into question at some points. But I think maybe, Maria, you could email me your question separately and I could try and give you more detail in relation to the specific points you raise. We know that countries are starting at very different points. So level playing fields when it comes to energy are very difficult to achieve, even though they are important. Just in summary, because time is very short, I did say that I would back reference Bas Eickhout's question in relation to the platform and some of criticism that would have come from the platform. Look, the platform is vital to the work that we do here in the Commission. And those experts, because they are experts, have been absolutely essential to us getting to the place we are today. I never I'm concerned about criticism. I think it would be very strange if there was not some reaction. So some of our colleagues on the platform want us to go further and faster and whatever. And, you know, maybe part of me would like to do that. But I equally know that I need to work with co-legislators. And we need to have political buy-in. And we need to understand that while we'd like to build it all in a day, it's going to take a few days to get all of this rightly in place. And I, of course, will be responding to the platform because I value what they do. In relation to your comments about the expert groups in member states, look, we're all in a learning curve here, and I think the member states are working to the best they can in trying to help us move our economies towards sustainability. I suppose my last few remarks are that this is a very big moment. I fully respect, because I come from your house, the important role of the European Parliament in deciding the fate of this delegated act. And I would ask that those who have concerns, you know, and I've listened very carefully and taken good note of those concerns, would try and stand back and look at the wider perspective of what we are trying to do here and support that what is there is really solid, is being watched globally, and with us build a new, if you like, versions of the taxonomy as things evolve, whether it's in relation to forestry or other areas around energy production, when we include agriculture, or indeed what happens with gas and nuclear. Lastly, to say the next step is difficult, and therefore I think we should be able to speak to one another about those difficulties, but we have to find solutions. And I think if we work well together, we will. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be with you. I long for the day when I'm physically with you, Pascal and others within the room, but for now it's good to be able to connect. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We've finished our list of speakers. I really would like to thank Commissioner McGuinness for her participation to this scrutiny session, as well as the members that contributed to a transparent debate on this issue, which is very important for Parliament. The EU's taxonomy is really at the heart of the action plan on financing sustainable growth. It will have a major impact on channeling capital flows to support our inclusive transition to a net zero economy by 2050. So this was a particularly critical exercise, and I just cut it here because we are going over time, and I pass the floor to Pascal.
Well, thank you, Irene. Thank you, Mered, and I cannot agree more with you when saying that the relationship with the Commission, and actually the relationship with yourself, will be key in order to move this process forward up to the end, having all the necessary legal acts adopted and approved both by the Parliament and by the Council. So very important that we keep dialoguing in trust, and that's exactly what we did today. Thank you.